Our guests today, Joe Hagan and Tim Davis, are the creators of the All I Want to Do Is Dream project, and are responsible for inventing an original and contemporary lens through which to examine the American dream. Their project is influenced by a collaboration by Walker Evans and James Agee, who famously combined portraits with text in their 1941 book, Let Us Now Praise Famous Men. The main focus of Evans and Agee's book was the American South during the Depression, whereas Davis and Hagan's work includes a diverse spectrum of contemporary Americans, from teenage girls at a football game to a mentally ill, homeless mother of 6, to a successful African-American business entrepreneur. All I Want to Do Is Dream offers a dynamic take on portraiture by giving the viewer a chance to physically see the person who is speaking in the form of a seemingly spontaneous snapshot, and to hear what they have to say via direct quote. To quote Davis himself, "The idea of the project was to bring to light the aspirations of the American people at this very instant, across class, race, gender, level of education, and certainly political divides." Our fellow student Jaime Merkel writes, "Davis and Hagan are illustrating the struggle of the American dream, rather than the failure of it. As a result of exposure to the voices of so many people whom we call, in some way, who we can all, in some way, relate to, and given that each of us has our own aspirations, a viewer is inspired to examine his or her own dreams, and subsequently wonder what our own profile might look like if Hagan and Davis approached us on the street."
Joe Hagan is a contributor to New York Magazine, Rolling Stone, and Men's Journal, among other publications. His journalistic, long-form articles create in-depth profiles in and of themselves of other prominent political and celebrity figures such as the Bush family, Bill Maher, Donald Trump, Henry Kissinger, Hillary Clinton, and most recently, Alec Baldwin. In 2010, he published a work based on a long-lost secret diary of the singer Nina Simone. In 2011, it was awarded Capitol Press's Best Music Writing. Tim Davis's work spans across media, from photography to writing to do-it-yourself Olympics videos. It's been featured in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Guggenheim Museum, the Walker Art Center, and elsewhere. It often incorporates music, poetry, and photography. In his essay, Portrait of the Artist, he published in Print magazine in August of last year, he writes, "A portrait tries hard to tell us about the sitter, to draw out something in him, or to let the light off his face to conjure meaning." Tim Davis and Joe Hagan explore this technique in their project, and the result is an evolving and transmogrified American dream. Please join us in welcoming Tim Davis and Joe Hagan.
Can we each get our own microphone, because we're going to wrap this whole thing old school style? No microphone. Okay. Thanks for having us here. Those introductions were beautiful. I don't remember saying any of those things, but I'm sure I did. I'm just going to give you a little background about this project, and then each of us is going to tell us a little bit of where we came from, our works. In 2012, in the lead up to the presidential election, we're just two friends who happen to live in the same town. We do very different things in many ways. He's an art photographer. He's doesn't do journalism and journalistic portraits of any kind up to the moment that we met. And I usually do magazine stories, usually of powerful people or known people. But we were talking about how kind of dissatisfied we were with the image of America just through the political spectrum and through social media and the internet. It all seemed to kind of produce very similar and kind of narrow emotional spectrum of anger and reactionary feelings, and the news is always sort of focusing on very predictable kind of emotions about the country, and it was very depressing. And we thought, well, how can we kind of, wouldn't it be great if we could somehow get around that filter and just get down onto the street level, talk to people, and get a more granular view of how people are experiencing life in America, outside of the virtual world, outside of the usual kind of media lenses. And there was only one way to figure out if this was even a plausible thing to do, which was just to go out and start trying. And so we did. You know, one day we just got in the car, drove up to the next town, which happened to be Kingston, New York, which is a kind of a challenged, you know, economically challenged town, very unusual, eccentric place actually. And
used to be it was the first capital of the state of New York.
that's right. You know,
Burned it down.
right? And so we just saw somebody on the side of the road, pulled over, started talking, and kind of unbelievable and sometimes magical things started happening. We were both blown away by our own personal experiences. People were very incredibly open to us and vulnerable and emotional. And it was as if nobody had ever asked them what they thought, which that was a big revelation for us, was nobody actually asks anybody what they think or feel. And if they do, it's like it's about a murder in the evening news, right? It's just more like, tell us what's going on in your life. And, people just were very revealing. And then we decided, then we had the challenge of how to make this work as a kind of piece, with how Tim had his challenges of like, how do I do portraits? How do I approach people in the context of what I do, creating images in a way that's not predictable or cliche or whatever. And for me, it was thinking about just how to let people's voices come out in the best possible way, their stories. And so I'll briefly talk about where I was coming from when I came to this project, and Tim's going to talk a little bit about his own background. So I'm going to give you a very, compacted version of how I got into writing in general. Yeah, I'm supposed to hit this.
Want me to get the lights?
I guess so, yeah. Oh, there we go.
Let me also say that I'd rather have you yell out questions rather than wait till the end. If you have a question about something or you think what we're saying is bull, just say it. Yeah. Don't wait until the end to a formal setting. I prefer to be interrupted. Make a good bumper sticker.
Oh.
I don't know how I feel
the
about that.
backlights on.
That's good. Yeah, that works. So.
This darkness is good?
This is great.
Okay.
So just a quick journey, my own journey as a writer is just like, not very surprising necessarily, but reading this book in high school about people just driving around America, that's sort of in some ways the, spirit of my interest in writing came out of the idea of some people driving around, having interactions in places in America, almost as if it were an exotic experience, right? I mean, you go out into the country and you think you know what the country is, and then you find out through various adventures that it's actually this unbelievably complicated, interesting, surprising place. This book had a huge impact on me. Poetry in general, especially this sort of this attempt to wrap one's arms around the entire country and kind of somehow channel the spirit of the country, if there could be such a thing, right? And that's an incredibly beautiful and very sophisticated thing to try to do, without being a propagandist or. He connects the sort of manifest destiny of the country to cosmic, his experience as a human, in the most cosmic level. It's an amazing, obviously, piece of work. When I later in life got into journalism, it was what they called the new journalism, the idea that you could approach a story from your own point of view and through the prism of personal experience. And Tom Wolfe was a huge influence on me, and that was a different, he famously dropped himself into the middle of the counterculture in the mid-'60s, and fantastically to me describes in the most beautiful, hilarious, funny way being around these people who were tripping on acid, and never himself once took it during this period, actually. And you would never know that. I mean, he just, because his artistry as a writer was so wonderful, he could somehow take you into it without actually fully being inside of it. Gates Elias, another person that was a very big influence on me, is about portraits of people, often famous people. Frank Sinatra, his most famous encounter, in which he actually never actually talks to Frank Sinatra, but and only talks to people around him, his handlers, and comes out with the most amazing kind of vision of what this guy was about. John McPhee, sort of like, he's like the godfather of like, you know, modern long-form journalism, which so he was a huge influence on me. A Room Full of Huffings, if you haven't read that, about you know, the director of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in the 60s, really insanely amazing piece. And then this sort of sent me over the edge. Here's a guy who spent 2 years hanging out with soccer thugs exclusively in England. He comes away with one of the most raw, wrenching pieces of journalism that you're likely to read, and kind of you know, gets himself involved in massive street-level fist fights with, like, as a fan of his team, fighting in the streets of Italian teams and French teams, but a wild story. And then this book, as was mentioned, this started as a magazine story that James G. was assigned by Fortune to go down and, you know, do a portrait of the rural poor in the South, and basically realizes that he's so hit so hard by it emotionally, so intensely, that he has to go way beyond the mere magazine story. Kind of goes crazy and gets so involved in it and creates this masterwork that's very much related to Leaves of Grass. It's very much in the spirit of the big, kind of all-enveloping poetic voice that he takes on while in trying to elevate the lives of these people who had nothing, had no voice. Carl Sandburg, yet another poet, sort of in the spirit of the populist spirit of, you know, trying to give voice to the people. So here's the work that I would say is probably most related to what we are doing, and kind of what frankly gave me the inspiration to do this, which is Studs Terkel working, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it's just interviews with people, and he just writes down what they say. I'm sure it's edited to some degree, but like just voices of people telling about what it's like to work in whatever job they do, from a waitress to an accountant to a car salesman, all over the country. And you get all kinds of regional voices, all kinds of like daily strife with people with, you know, trying to make it, all the way up to like famous people and people working in Hollywood. So you get just this full, rich spectrum. He was a great interviewer. This is, you know, in the spirit of, you know, oral histories. This is another book about basically a biography of Edie Sedgwick, you know, this sort of tragic art model character from the 60s, all told by people who were around her only in their voices. So you don't have any real direction from any writer. It's just edited voices of people talking, and it creates a narrative. I sort of used something to that, you know, this is a piece that I did recently, as told to. I just took his words through several interviews that I did, and you know, tried to, and edited them into a coherent essay that was entirely in his voice. And the challenge in these, which we can get into later, is how to take what somebody says. When people talk for an hour or two, they don't necessarily talk in a beautiful linear essay. They talk in anecdotes, and they go this way and that way, and you have to figure out how to make that cohere, or just pick out the relevant parts of the story. So that's just sort of a quick take of you know, a journey through different kinds of journalistic influences and impressions. Some other stories that I was involved in. I didn't know that's such a some other things that I wrote about, people I wrote about. And so another attractive thing about what I'm doing with Tim, what got us really into this, is for me, not writing about famous people was an incredible revelation and an incredible pleasure. These people are savvy about how to talk to journalists. Whereas when you go out on the street, people are much more open, much more vulnerable. You have much more responsibility to kind of, you know, see them in a sympathetic light, because they don't have any of the machinery of the media to, you know, protect them or handle them. You have a completely different MO. You don't know what you're going to get out of them, so you don't know what your purpose is. You talk to a stranger, they could tell you any number of stories, or they could tell you to get lost. It's like a completely different experience of journalism, and one that's incredibly refreshing and wonderful, and we'll get into more about that. You had a question?
How often did you guys find yourselves getting told get lost?
You know, it's shockingly little. Shockingly little.
20%.
Yeah, I would say that, yeah, maybe 20%. And, you know, sometimes we really put on the hard sell.
Yeah.
And just begged almost, you know.
And
I've actually seen him on his knees, you know. Please, ma'am, talk to us. No, no. She's like, get away from me. You know, so then we got to move on, you know. And we'll talk a little bit more about those when we start to look at our examples, and we'll give you some backstory on how some of these went. And so I'm going to turn it over to Tim Davis.
I'm going to start this off by making a horrible, what is inevitably a horrible mistake, which is I would love to turn off this PowerPoint and show it with presenter tools rather than slideshow. So I'm going to hit this, and I'm going to go view presenter tools. Where you see that? This is a different version. It's going to go back to, oh, it didn't even go back to the beginning. Beautiful. Okay. Was that not it? Because there are things written, slideshow, presenter view. It's a different version. Anyway, hope it comes up. Because I have text that I wrote. All right, so, oh, schnooky badookies. See, you see the present, this is supposed to be work the other way.
Sorry.
You're not supposed to see that bottom thing, and instead I don't see it, and you do.
Should I get Moises to come back?
I don't know if this has to do with the way this thing is mirrored.
Anyone a PowerPoint guru here?
When you click that, it also showed swap views.
Oh,
Yes,
where's
Patricia.
that?
Presenter view, yeah. And then up right there it says swap displays.
Oh, yes.
I can't see it. Is that
Oh,
it?
there, Tim, yes.
Aha!
Thanks, Patricia.
Yeah. Okay,
See these
quickly, there's some personal history, I'm going to race right through it. I started out as a poet, and so everybody should start out life as a poet. Because anything you do after that is going to be an improvement. But I had several books published. One was this American Whatever, which I still think a great title. These are books that nobody read, and I recently encountered a guy who was when I went to graduate school, I went to Yale to the MFA, and I encountered the former dean, and he said, you know, I had an experience recently where I decided to take up poetry, retired, and he's one of these people that can do anything. He repairs Model T Fords, and he said, so I went to the local bookshop and I got a bunch of poetry books, and I said, oh my God, there's a Tim Davis book in here. And I took it home, and I opened it up, and I saw that you had given it to me. It was addressed to me. So he had clearly not read it, given it, or sold it to the bookstore, and then bought it back 15 minutes later. So I morphed into being a photographer, and that was a great decision. And I'm not someone that's worked largely with people, and I'll show you a little bit about that. But the first project I really made seriously, I think speaks really interestingly to this project. So it was a project I made in the late 80s called Wanting Attention. And this was a project where the climate, very much like the climate is now, in the philosophical climate, everyone was talking about postmodernism and was saying, we can't see anything anymore. We're seeing a simulacrum, right? You guys have read Baudrillard. Do you have them read Baudrillard in your postmodern writing class?
Pas moi.
Anyway, everyone was concerned. This was before, and we were overwhelmed with information, and we can't see anything anymore. What we see when you see a thing is an image of that thing you've seen in the media. This was before the internet. This was before everybody had a computer in their pocket that could enable them to see anything at the world. Like, you could do anything. You could see any place on Earth while you're taking a dump on a train. You know what I mean? Like, it's like before all that. So I decided to investigate whether that was true. I didn't believe it. And so I walked around with this same camera right there, this big camera, old-fashioned camera, and I met people on the street and I gave them objects to look at. And I had a big bag with equipment. I had a big bag with, I looked like a homeless guy, with objects in it, random things, and I would give them to people, and I just would try to see if I could focus on their minds, their eyes actually snapping into focus and looking at the thing, rather than just looking in the direction of it. It was a completely naive way of thinking and counter to the philosophical trends in art at the time. Right? This is the moment when like Cindy Sherman is making self-portraits and Richard Prince is cropping Marlboro ads and saying that just reconstituting things from the culture is how it works. So I made this project called Wanting Attention, which is a pun on wanting means both lacking and desiring. So I was trying to see if it was true, whether, and that kind of innocence I think runs directly into the project we're making right now, which is also counter to the spirit of the times and very old-fashioned on some level. That's the Tivoli intersection right there, by the way.
Is that where you see here?
Nope.
Oh.
And we have a little like coincidence here of it's great, that hairstyle. From there, I started to make work that was more about objects and places and architecture. And I always thought about myself as working against the spirit of the architecture. And so there are some works from an office, trying to find sculptural and painterly incursions in these spaces, accidental sculptures. That's from a hospital series, from a series of parking lots. And this series called Retail, which was pictures of houses made at night with reflections of global corporate entities reflected in the window. So that leads me to a much larger project called My Life in Politics. And this is really the project that kind of trained me for this project. Because it was big in scope, right? This is a project that's narrow in scope. All I'm doing is looking for houses that are near gas stations and restaurants, and I'm trying to maneuver myself into a position to see the reflection. And it's all done again with this old-fashioned film camera, large format, very cumbersome, slow. This project, I decided to sort of see what the political world looked like in my life. And it does feature some portraits. And it was a big book and a show, and the show produced a newspaper with captions, and I wrote poems, little caption poems. And what I wanted in the show was it was an enormous show in this huge space in New York, and I wanted everyone to walk the whole thing reading a newspaper and not looking at my pictures at all. So I'm going to read a couple of these poem captions. May we describe the look in her eyes? If there weren't rock and roll, maybe no. But fuck you, I love you's here to stay, as long as there are ATMs to rage and lean against, and candy apple hair dye at every corner deli. Rage, light, people for, against, people against, for. The right likes it frictionless, the left likes it glowy. Open your eyes and tell me a story. Xena warrior princess looks like Bill Clinton's mom, as do some of the women he loves. And in Sunset Boulevard t-shirt shops, I've come to play Pompeii. Herculaneum, says Xena. Okay. Meanwhile, the wrist is voted most erotic axis as Buffy and John Kennedy share a, yes, explicable encounter. The figures at right are believed to be Mao and Matahari. Paralegal blue mascara, half a migrant mother, half a sharecropper's wife, but all plot. There once was a girl from McMansion. There once was a fashion of resistance. There once seemed a reason for fighting. The liberals were scratching their patches. The olive gray drab felt committed. The street seemed beyond the dean's purview. You can't even shock your grandmother. So there are portraits in here, and there are things in our portraits. Looking at, but there is text. There's a lot of text. I'll skip over this. Another project this project I made largely in Italy, called The New Antiquity, also features portraits. I've always been skeptical about the portrait. I've always been nervous about it. And one reason is that if you photograph a person, the picture is always going to be less interesting than the person, right? I mean, a person exists throughout time, and they have moods. If you photograph an object, the picture itself might be just as interesting, if not more interesting than the object, because it's just another object. So I've always been nervous about it. I had a lecture in Italy. This was shot in Italy, where I said, this is my mother and my sister, and no one laughed. In Italy, you do not mess with the mom. Okay, so you're getting a sense of me as a photographer and the various ways in which I've worked with people and worked with text. And when Joe and I sort of like cooked up this idea, and it's an idea that's still cooking slowly. We're not like working on this full time. It's kind of like when we have a moment and an opportunity from the rest of our lives. It's forced us to. I've really been thinking of what it means to put text and image together. I think I come from a tradition in photography that wants the pictures to stand alone, that wants them to be powerful and communicable. That's not the right word.
You don't want it to be communicated.
No. It's like a thing you catch from looking at it. It would be kind of amazing. My pictures are a disease that you catch from looking at my pictures. Anyway, so I've sort of been thinking a lot about what it means to put these things together. So here's a page of text by Ouija, the great New York police photographer, who was kind of like an interesting guy. He was a police photographer. He didn't work for the police. He chased ambulances and found out, often would get there before the police, and took pictures of all kinds of horrifying things. He fashioned himself an artist, and he always produced these shows and texts and books that always involved text. And his interest in being an artist kind of ruined him as a photographer, actually, because in the end it was all like out of focus pictures and swirly darkroom experiments that kind of ruined the crazy energy of his pictures. And the most famous photography book, Family of Man, in the 50s, in the Museum of Modern Art, curated by Edward Steichen, the famous photographer. In this humanistic tradition that the camera is supposed to be able to describe the world in a clear, coherent way, enough so that there can be a caption which teaches you what the pictures say. Photographs, are interesting in that you can know what a picture is of, you know what the subject is, and have no idea what it means. It's sort of the strange conundrum of all photography is like that. And these guys were working hard against that. They were working at like reducing the ambiguity of the picture so that you would know what it meant, which can be a problem. This book, John Sharkovsky's Looking at Photographs in 1976, is a wonderful book if you ever get a chance to look at it. He was the curator of photography at MoMA for a long time. And they're just little essays about pictures, less than one page. And he's such a beautiful writer, very succinct. So this is a model that I've always been thinking of like something where one of the interesting, how many artists are there? Are there any artists in here, or are you all writers? Who's an artist? Raise your hand. You're all writers.
We had an architecture student, didn't we?
Well, one of the things that being an artist is very interesting and complicated is that when you guys all get your books published, you're going to know that someone is going to sit down and read that book, and it might take them days, and it might take weeks, and it might take months. When you're an artist, someone can look at all the work you've done for, let's say, a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, in 15 seconds. They walk into the gallery, and they turn around and go like this. They scan the thing, and that's very disheartening, I find, for students. I'm always like, well, maybe they'll remember it for the rest of their lives, but they want to look at it for 10 seconds. So one of the things I think Joe and I have been thinking about is like some kind of balance between text and image, something where the text element won't take you too much time to read it. It won't be like a massive investment. In that same way, the photographs are generous in that way. They don't necessarily force you to take too much time. William Eggleston's Guide on the left, one of my favorite books, one of my favorite little captions on the left, that's all. There's a project by a photographer named Jim Goldberg called Rich and Poor, where he photographed self-identified rich people and poor people, and then sent them the prints and had them write their responses to them right on them, which I think is just one of the most beautiful solutions to the problems of journalistic photography. The annals of photographic education are sort of guarded by philosophers who are terrified of what photographers and journalists do with their imagery. Artists get to be somewhat immune from that, about how ethical it is to describe anyone. And I'm not particularly interested in that, because I believe that good art trumps all other kinds of ethics. But these are artists who have tried creatively to work. This is Wendy Ewald, who works with kids all over the world and teaches them photography and then makes these kind of similar kind of responses. Walker Evans refused to have captions, and he didn't want the pictures to actually, and part of it is like maybe he read Agee writing and was like, this stuff is out of control. It really was like, it is kind of terrible. Yeah. It's very effusive, very romantic, and Evans was the opposite of a romantic. He's looking at things in the most direct, clear way, without sentimentality. So much so that he quit his job at the FSA, right, the Farm Security Administration, just like Obama did, during our big recession. They created a government agency, hired lots of artists and writers to go out and document. Oh no, wait, it didn't happen. Jesus, I thought that was going to happen, but FDR did do that. But Evans was not propagandistic enough. He kind of refused to be edited, and he was much more confident of himself as an artist. And kind of in that way presented an interesting model for me, for how I'm working, which was that wanting to make images that have their own, that could stand on their own, not necessarily being just content. And that creates an interesting problem for the way we work, and I'll get to our actual work, in that I am drawn to someone visually. Right? I'll just look at someone and think, that person's amazing, or I'm interested in the life. And they're not necessarily an interesting person. And it can be very disheartening to run into someone that you're just like, wow, that was a terrible interview, and it was a great, no matter, Joe's like, just absolutely, he's like a genius at getting information out of people. And he's just working it like, you can't believe somebody working every strategy possible, but they just aren't. And Tom was like, the light on this guy is amazing. So we're running, it's an interesting problem of any collaboration, and certainly of the problem of putting text and image together. So this is the first one we did, and that first day Joe was describing. I think you should come up here. And you can see that the images, for the most part, are made with this like big camera that we're using here. So it's not very spontaneous. And I've always been, in portraiture, I've always felt like it's a collaboration, and so I'm not at all adverse to the idea that it's like posed. But I'm interested in the feeling of it not being posed, even if it is.
Okay, so I thought should we read some of these? Yeah. So I'm going to read a couple of them.
Can you read that?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know if I can.
Read it off of here.
We
I
can
guess I
read
can
it.
just read it off of here.
Yeah.
I'll read it off here. But let me just preface that with a couple of things, just pivoting off of what he said. This is a project that we learn every time we go out and do this, and as we have gone along, we learned more and more and more about how we operate together, how the best way to pick people or to find the right people, and how to approach people, and how is his image going to react to, juxtapose with how effusive or interesting the person is. The first time we tried it, everything came together in such a magical way that we wanted to continually do it. And we saw this guy on the street waiting for a school bus to come, And we came and we said, hey, what's going on? Wait for my son to get off the bus. And then he invited us in. Once his son showed up, his son was African American. That was, kind of a surprise right away. And then he invited us in, and a story unfolded. And we interviewed him probably for, I don't know, at least an hour. And but as he said, we were thinking, well, how could we need to find a way to get the essence of this guy's story, so that people can see the image and read it and do it and have it work quickly. So now I'm going to read it, and this is the result. Joe and Dante. See, our story is not the normal stories. This is going to be a bizarre thing. That's my son Dante. I just adopted him. I come from a very Catholic family. It was such a hard thing, first of all, to know what I was. And now, when I was calling up all my brothers and sisters, and they said, God, that's great. With Mom, it's like, oh, do you really think you should be doing this? My dad was a policeman and a detective, so I would go with him. He'd be like leaving me in a car and somebody had committed suicide on the railroad tracks or whatever. My partner, Matthew, and I were head of our neighborhood watch because prostitutes would come right here on the train tracks, by the train tracks. We saw the house in the wintertime. Nobody's around. We move in, end of August. Hello, what is this? Why are they picking up prostitutes up at our stop? And we're calling up the police, and they're like laughing at us, like, don't you know where you are? So we're getting everybody arrested. And lo and behold, who are we getting arrested? But Dante's mom and dad. But we didn't know at the time. Yeah, because his mom was a prostitute and his dad is a pimp. So you can imagine what we were thinking when the story was coming out. We were completely, dumbfounded by this. And it felt like we had, it felt very easy in this particular case for him to reveal himself. And in many ways, the challenge was taking this guy's story and kind of reducing it to its essence somehow, and having it act like poetry in some way, in a way that you could read it and have it, still have some ambiguity to it. Oh, actually, this was actually the very next guy that we saw working in a lamp store. This is a case in, Tim was in the city. He sees this couple on the street corner. Hey, can I take a picture? Later on, I went and met up with the woman and had lunch with her and interviewed her, and we created a piece out of that.
There should be, I thought we had the, oh no, is that one not one you want to read? No, I guess not. I put the ones, the spreads in there.
Right. So this is just to give you a quick lay of like the land and the many people that we find. We saw a junkyard off the road, we pulled in, and we just started looking for people. This is a young man and his father. They're from Jamaica, and they were amazing, kind of natural storytellers. We heard about this woman through a friend. She's a 99-year-old woman who was once a Broadway casting director and kind of first cast Katharine Hepburn on Broadway in the 40s. Was, very repetitive and had a kind of like, not practically no memory actually, but out of her kind of like repetitive attempt to tell what she thought about America, just ended up having this kind of incantatory dialogue or voice, and we sort of tried to capture that in her piece. Like this young man at a shopping center reading that book. This woman had very extreme negative views of America, which was interesting to read about. Austrian, a Holocaust refugee who grew up in Argentina, had a really amazing story. And this family, this was down and out Troy, New York. They were kind of having a kind of community party to try to pull together in the face of all the blight that was happening to their area. It was, I kind of love this because it's kind of got some irony to it, but also some kind of sweetness to it as well. And this is was a woman. Okay, so every one of these has a backstory. I won't bore you with them all up, but there's, we were just in the airport in Arizona, and we saw this woman. We walk up to her, and it turns out she's, a Native American whose father was a medicine man, and her last name was Owl, and it was just like just sort of a testament to the fact that you can kind of like throw a rock in America and hit an interesting person. You may not think you can, but then when you start to get out there and meet people, I'm actually more often than not shocked at how many amazing stories are out there. It's actually the minority of people we come across who are difficult to get interesting things out of. We ended up going out to he got a Craigslist ride for us to go from one town to another in Arizona. It was a Navajo guy, ex-Marine, studying law. He said, I'm going out, I can take you to where you want to go, but and ultimately going to a high school football game. It was Friday night. He said his nephew was playing a game, and he said, we'll go with you. And we ended up seeing a Navajo football team play a kind of rural white team and get horrendously crushed, 66-6. It was actually very depressing and sad.
They were literally, the Cowboys destroyed the Indians.
It was really rough going. And this was the quarterback for the Navajo team after, because he was not happy. He had big dreams that a scout would show up from a college and see him, and it was a very complicated situation and actually difficult to get him to. We had to get the brother in because we needed the brother as his sort of support there. It was really emotional. His parents were standing by. It was really fun.
I think that's an interesting one to mention something about, by the way, which is that we ended up accidentally spending 8-9 hours with this guy in this car.
Yeah.
Drove us, it was hours. When you get out to the West, space is so different. And this guy was really interesting.
Yeah.
If you really wanted a portrait of what America is, this guy was deep in there, and he was so complicated. He was so weirdly hostile toward us, and yet clearly loved talking to us. And it was just everything about American history was played out in this conversation we were having. And even though we got some great stuff through this experience of going to his nephew's football game, the real interview was with this guy, and he wouldn't do it. He, no matter how hard we pressed him, we're giddily driving through Arizona at night. We have no idea where we are. We have somebody we don't know, an ex-Marine. There was definitely fear that he could just slit our throats on the side of the road at any moment, and nobody would ever find us.
Yeah, he had a real kind of bristly.
He was not friendly in the beginning at all, but he was so interesting, and no matter what happened, he wouldn't let us talk to him.
Right.
And by the end, we were making jokes and just giddy. You and I have been up for 1 million hours in a row. And so there's always loss, and I think about that in terms of any project or writing project, or that there are going to be these epiphanies that you're not going to be able to capture. There's something about that pixie dust of what you don't get that is really special.
Yeah. So a lot of these were taken along basically Route 66 heading out to California. This is in Barstow, California. Or is that? Yeah, Barstow, kind of a down and out way station between LA and Las Vegas. They invited us out to the Hotel 6 pool afterwards, and we hung out with their mom and various relatives, and you get into all kinds of interesting adventures along the way, which is definitely part of the appeal of the project also. This guy personally built all of the Starbucks on the West Coast. He was like the contractor for every Starbucks.
So he claimed.
He also claimed to have been a professional baseball pitcher and almost killed in Vietnam in a wild firefight. Tales went on and on. We didn't know if any of them were true, and we kind of didn't care because his storytelling style was so.
The minute we hit California, we realized that everything everyone's saying to us was probably a lie.
Yeah.
And that the idea of the American dream
Absolutely.
in the West is quite different than on the East. That there is a hopefulness that is maybe totally delusional, but it's we didn't expect it.
Yeah.
it all started with a guy that's not in this thing, but a guy in a gas station, a kind of Japanese guy, and the guy was so interesting. So he's just at a gas station, we stopped talking. He's third generation Japanese Californian. His grandparents were in internment camps.
Not this guy.
Not this guy, this other guy. And he's going on, and we were salivating, and he's like making all this money, and he has this thing, but his girlfriend betrays him, and he loses all his money, and it's perfect. And in the end, he tells us this thing about like he's investing in this water that has some kind of like positive, negative nanotechnology in it that's going to cause you to like your dreams to turn into spaceships, and it goes on. And we were like, wait a second, is everything you just said a lie? And that's part of, again, these little texts that you don't know what's true and what's not true, but hopefully it's all in the telling.
It's kind of like about a lot of this is about the voice. It's about the impressionism of the voice. And that's part of the texture of the country that we were trying to kind of get. And the more we do this, the more that sort of mosaic quality and all the kind of textures of voice and story begin to accumulate.
If you want to read any of these, we can,
yeah, I know. Like, well,
we can look them up. Oh, here we go.
Okay, so yeah, there's Bob. And here's this classic example. He wanted to photograph him only because of his hair. And I thought, well, this guy, he's just going to be a freak that lives around here. You know, who knows?
So you can probably scroll down. I think also link the website on our web. Where's my mouse?
Now we've lost control. Can I go down this thing? Oh, no.
Okay, so here's what's going to happen. Why don't we just look it up?
Okay. I'll start to read this, and maybe you can get it up in time for me to get down to this line here. So his name is Bob. We only use people's first names. We wanted them to be able to stand up in as almost like generic characters somehow, and not have them, and also not have them worry that their name's going to be out there or something. Just let it be. Yeah. So. I was the guy who did all the first Starbucks stores in the Western United States. Put the signs up, build the interior of the store 20 years ago. So I came out of Los Angeles, where I live, and I drove this one. I said, this looks like a good place. Let's put a store here. Then I went on to Las Vegas. I was drafted in 1967, and they sent me to Vietnam to carry a machine gun on the ground. I carried an M60 machine gun like Rambo. When I was drafted, I was a professional baseball player. I was a pitcher for Minnesota. My dad was in the Navy. My brother was in the Navy. I was pitching for Minnesota, and my dad said, I said to my dad, you better stay in, that's a typo, sorry. His dad said to him, you better stay in school and hide, because Vietnam is a real bad deal. I said,
I'm almost there. I got it!
Okay. Right, so, and I said, and my dad said, okay, so I said, well, I'm just going to go play. One night, I lost a baseball game 2-1 to a guy named Nolan Ryan. So I step out of the helicopter, go about as far as the In-N-Out burger, he's pointing, and rockets start flying at us, and I got hit in the chest. Boy, you're about to die, because it went through your lungs, and you're laying on the ground, and you can't breathe. You're going to die. And I was lucky that some guy drove me by a tree, and the shrapnel stopped, and they called in the artillery. I've been divorced twice, so they're doing whatever they're doing, I don't know. I'm always looking, interested in meeting a new lady. It's a lot different than it was in the 70s. You say hi if you've got a girlfriend. Today, if you go out with me, I want a BMW, whatever. Oftentimes people say, is that really your hair? I was in the VA hospital the other day in Long Beach. I walk in and the nurse has only seen me for seconds, and the lady says, God, look at your hair. And I said, would you like to touch it? And she says, yeah. Within a split second, she's running her hands through my hair. She stops with her hands in my hair, and she says, this is real. I go, yeah, you want to feel something else I got? Which is like one of those moments where we both look at each other and go, well. Okay, so, and so, you know, he was redeemed, I felt, in his instinct to just go for the hair.
In my case, it makes a lot of sense.
This is a politician in California that was sort of cornered at one point. His thing's quite long, but it's worth reading. He's an amazing raconteur, incredible storyteller. This guy was quite amazing.
We're going to do somebody.
Yeah.
We should do it on the next.
Okay, we'll do one more.
You want to read Lizette?
Yeah, we'll read Lizette. So when we got to Los Angeles at the train station, of course you walk out of the train, you go into the beautiful and we walk out to beautiful LA, sunshine day, and we see this woman, and she's working, I think she was sweeping at the time, out front, and we thought, let's talk to her. It was just sort of like, we were kind of running on instinct a little bit with a lot of this stuff. And once again, one of these situations where you can't, not find a good story in some ways. Was that I'm a cashier in the train station. I'm a breaker. So let's say you're working in the booth, I come around and give you your break. I want to go higher. I want to be in one of those glass buildings, just like sitting down, watching the view, doing nothing, do nothing. Just sit around, look at the view, and just do my work. How about you? I got a partner. His name is Brian. We go to Hollywood Park, we just lay on the grass and look at the sunset when it's pink. Have you seen it? It makes me feel like that God is just a good artist. I was born here and then raised over in Mexico. I don't have a dad, just my mom. My mom is my mom and my dad. So yeah, she brought me back at the age of 13. I used to rap. I was in the Scientology church in Hollywood. Behind it, there's a celebrity center. You know where Tom Cruise goes? I was one of them 60 kids on stage at the celebrity center. I was an actress, singer, dancer, especially a dancer. I was 15. I had a vision once. I was cussing out some Christian guy. I told him there's no God. The Bible is just to distract you. And if he's there, why doesn't he prove it? Why don't he show it? That night I went to sleep and he showed me like the distance that me and you are. I'm me and my conscience and you're the enemy. It's super pitch black and the devil goes, ha ha ha, where's your God? And that's when I said, there is my God. From there, I saw a white light, like brighter than white, like super white, pure white, descending from down. I wanted to see, but I couldn't see. But I just got to see his hand touch me on my left shoulder. He just touched me. I woke up and I knew that was a sign of symbolism. The enemy is right there, and he's right there. It exists, a spiritual world. That's when I started learning. I was atheist. From atheist to Scientology to Santeria, and then Christian. So, beautifully, Tim captured the moment when she's talking about the spirit hand touching her on the shoulder. Kind of a beautiful synthesis there, and kind of symbiosis that if we can achieve in the image and the text is kind of a beautiful thing. So should we,
What else do we have here? Just to show you what the layouts are like.
Yeah.
Right now, we're still tinkering around with what it's going to look like.
some of these images will appear in a photography magazine called Blind Spot, which if you ever see that around in the coming issue, you'll see some of these images there like that.
Yeah, well, so maybe we should, rather than get into this business, which I was going to talk about,
Yeah.
maybe we should forget that.
Yeah.
So we're hoping that we could end this presentation, so we'll hopefully have time to take questions. We're kind of hoping that we might make one of these right now. So do we have any volunteers who would like to be photographed and interviewed at the very present moment? Anyone that?
I see hands. Definitely see some hands.
Do you care? She was the first hand I saw right there.
Yeah. Let's do it. Come on down.
Okay, so there's a variety of ways that this works. When there's a lot of light outside, it's easy for me to photograph while the interview is going on. Would you mind sitting right here? And maybe Sam, you should, yeah. No, please leave it actually. So I guess what I'm kind of hoping is, do you mind if I take the picture first? In this case, I think it's going to make sense to take the picture first. And can I talk to her over here?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can start talking to her. I might just interrupt at one point. Okay.
And Emily's
It's
going
gonna
to film
be-
you.
Sorry.
Emily is going to film you while.
That's
Okay.
right.
So
What's your name?
Maggie.
Maggie?
Yeah.
How old are you?
19.
19. Are you just getting to the school this year? Is this your first year? Or is
Yes.
It is. You're a freshman. What are you you're studying writing?
Writing.
What kind of writing? Not, you don't know yet? What was the last thing you wrote?
Last year was my first short story.
Oh, really? And can you tell me what's it about?
Well, it's called Little House.
Little House?
And it's about a single mom raising her child.
A single mom raising a child? And what was the inspiration for that?
Before you answer that, Lily, can I shift over to that seat?
It's very typical, by the way. He's always interrupting me in the interview. It's actually fine. It works fine. What was the inspiration for that?
It actually came to me when we were free writing my fiction class. I have no idea where it came from.
You don't know where it came from. Do you know any single moms?
No.
No. So what was that like trying to kind of inhabit that? Was it a challenge for you, or?
Yeah, that's kind of why I pursued it into a story, because I didn't know anything about it.
Yeah. What was the sort of, what was the thing that helped you try to inhabit that? Like, what's the feeling there? I mean, what do you, yeah, did you feel like, was she unhappy? Was it frustrating?
Well, she was definitely frustrated. In the story, she had been in a bad relationship, and she got pregnant and left him as a result of that.
Yeah.
So she's recently on her own, and she has no idea what she's doing. So
Right.
she's alone, she's scared,
Right.
frustrated.
Yeah. And in order to like kind of tap into the feeling of like being alone and frustrated, did you like have any kind of, did you find some place in yourself that could sort of understand how that felt? I mean, often when you're trying to maybe write fiction, you're trying to figure out how to, realistically tap into that feeling.
I didn't think about it at all. It just kind of
Came out.
Yeah.
Where are you from?
Let me interrupt
Yeah,
you.
you go ahead.
Joe, just come over here, right where you are.
Yeah.
Just a little to your right,
Yeah.
a little more.
Yeah.
I just would love everybody to just keep doing what you're doing. Don't look at me though. Just look at Joe, like you're watching this presentation.
Yeah.
Please don't look at me. You don't have to smile.
Yeah. Where are you
You're just
from?
you're at a boring lecture.
Where?
Connecticut.
Connecticut? Whereabouts?
It's a suburb of a suburb outside Hartford.
What is it called?
Simsbury.
Simsbury? And so you just graduated basically last spring?
Yeah, from June.
Yeah. And how did you know you wanted to come here?
I've wanted to live in New York since I was 3. First time I came here.
When you were 3, you remember that?
Yeah, it's my first memory.
Really? Tell me about that.
Me and my dad were in a hotel room, sitting on the window seat, and our faces pressed against the glass and against the streets. That's all I have. But
Yeah. Do you know what the hotel was you
No,
were asking?
yeah.
Yeah.
Hold on one second. Everybody hold still. You have to hold really still. Everyone, breathe in, breathe out. What was it, Joe? Keep going. Sorry.
What was your dad doing?
it was me and my parents. My older siblings were at camp, so we went on a cruise with them.
You went on a cruise ship?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Where did the cruise ship go?
It was just, I don't remember. We just went out of New York. It was like 3 days long.
Yeah. And so your siblings are much older.
Yes.
How much older?
7 and 9 years old.
Oh wow. So by the time you were like 10, they're leaving the house.
Yes.
Right? So did you feel like you had siblings? Were they around? Did they take care of you? What was that relationship?
Not very well.
Not very well. No. And are you close to them now, or has that
I'm closer
changed?
to them now that the older I get, the differences, they shrink.
Right.
So it's easier to talk to.
And where are they?
My brother, I have no idea, he's kind of homeless right now. But my
You don't know where he is?
He jumps around a lot
That's interesting.
without telling us, so.
Right.
My sister lives in Arizona.
Whereabouts?
It's called Surprise. Surprise Arizona.
We've been there. No, actually. So tell me about the brother. I mean, when's the last time you talked to him?
Christmas.
Christmas? Did he come home for that, or he did?
He's still in Connecticut, we just don't know where.
Right. So when he leaves the house, does he tell you where he's going, or what the plan is, or?
I mean, we had a house somewhere, but he was real fond of it, and I think they're moving this car right
what is the sort of, is there something behind that? Is it like, does he have trouble with drugs, or
Yeah.
is it, what kind of drugs?
I don't know. He's not very open about it.
Right.
Honestly.
How does he look? Does he seem like it's been hard worn him down, or
No.
he seems to get it?
I mean, he's in the shower very often.
And so that must be hard on your parents. Is he the first one?
Yeah.
Oh, really? Wow. And so how, do you talk to your parents about it, or they?
They talk to each other more to do about it.
Right. And when did you know that you wanted to be a writer?
When I was about 6, I started reading Superman comic books, and I wanted to be a writer like Lois Lane.
Right. Oh, that's fun. So it's like, it wasn't the writing, it was the being a writer in this sort of venue where your boyfriend is.
That was a big part of it.
Yeah, that's exactly. And so what was the first like sort of book that you read where you wanted to write like that?
I don't remember. I read Pride and Prejudice repeatedly when I was younger. So I was probably around then.
Right. How young were you?
7, 8, around the same time.
You read Pride and Prejudice when you were 7?
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. That's fascinating. That was a quick leap just in 3 years of Superman, right? Most people take a lot longer than that. What's your earliest memory of your oldest brother?
I was sad, and I was sitting on the steps of my house, and he started fake beating himself up for music. So he would like punch himself in the floor, or like pick himself up and punch him.
Trying to like make you feel better.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Wow. What do you remember you were sad about? Is that just sort of
I think I was on timeout.
You were on timeout. Yeah, that's sad. So how does your other sibling, the middle child, then, and his girl? Sister, right? And what's her relationship like with him?
Much closer, for obvious reasons. They're a lot closer in age. And they got into a lot of the same stuff in high school that I was, 7 and not really part of.
Right. Did you say it got involved in the same stuff? Was it like partying and stuff like that?
Oh, yeah.
This happens all the time, by the way.
He gets closer and closer.
Yeah, that's possible. It's hard, you're interviewing from this distance. And have you talked to the middle sister about what happened? Like, she went a different direction. She was able to kind of escape that
Yeah,
path
that's mainly why she left.
to get away from him. So would you blame sort of like the area, or there was a group of friends that they got sort of sucked into, or what? Was it the school was not good? You don't really know. It wasn't like that when you were there. Did you go to the same school?
Yes.
Right.
But,
You took a different, totally different.
yes.
In a way, you had probably different parents. Okay? They were different people.
Yeah, but they were, relieved to have me.
Yeah.
But I never, shaved my head randomly, or pierced my own belly button, or
Right.
came home drunk,
Right. That's interesting. So you probably have a pretty close relationship with them, I suspect. What do your parents do?
My mom's a preschool teacher, and my dad is a lightning protection guy.
A lightning protection guy?
Yeah, I don't know what the official term is.
Like lightning rods
Yeah.
to prevent buildings from. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Might have to call you if you need somebody to put a lightning. And did you ever have an experience of being brought to work with them, or getting to see what they do? What did you do?
I've sat on some roofs in my life.
You have?
Yeah.
Tell me about that. I want to know about that.
I remember sitting on the peak of the roof,
Yeah.
trying not to roll off.
Yeah. How old were you?
Probably 5.
Jesus.
It's fun.
Yeah. So you went. He took you up there. He must have had some harness on you or something. No, he just brought you up here. 5 years old on the roof. You're reading Pride and Prejudice. In the roof of the house, trying not to get struck by a ripple of
Yeah.
So that was that's nice. That was nice. Do you remember being scared?
Yeah.
You were sort of frightened.
We went on a roof over Christmas break, and I was still scared of falling off.
Right, but you just did that again with him.
Yeah.
Tell me the sort of situation in which he's asked you to want to go on the roof.
It was my grandparents' house. He was
Yeah.
we had to go check the gutter.
Right. So you go up there with him.
Yeah.
So big extension ladders, you go up.
We actually climbed an antenna up.
What do you mean?
It was like a triangle with 3 sides and had little bars. It wasn't supposed to be a ladder, but it worked.
Right. And at what stage are you sort of looking and going, I'm no longer coming to all of them? That's great. So when I say, like, you know, when you hear about this project and you hear about this American dream, then what is that what's your first association with that phrase? So it's negative if you don't have it.
Yeah.
But that it's about getting it, right? And did your parents, were they like into America or like being patriotic or having a flag, or what was their sort of like posture towards being an American, or were they political? What was their sort of?
My mom's political, my dad doesn't care.
He doesn't care. And we're, you know, if they saw, like, if they were standing for the national anthem or something, would they get worked up about that?
Yeah.
No. Politically, just not real. And was your dad, not that far, but if you were to think about yourself at like 35, where do you see yourself?
Still here somewhere.
In New York?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Maybe you'd like to have a book published.
Several.
At several, hopefully, right? So, you know, if you could read Pride and Prejudice at 6, I think that you could. You know. All right, well, listen, thank you. I appreciate that. That was amazing.
Before we get questions, just one more shot. I think I have good work here. Just one more shot. Take one step back. Sure. Everyone just look at Joe. Don't look at me. Just hold very, what's your name? Hold still. One more. Just get you guys all in the picture. The long exposure, very 19th century way to photograph. Okay, one more time, hold still. Just looking at the screen. Look at the screen. Everyone look at the screen, not at me. It's you looking right at me. Over here. Art students don't take direction. Okay. Serious, you're looking at the screen, you're thinking about that guy on the screen. Hold still. Beautiful. Okay, thanks.
So, I am actually very surprised. Thank you so much. Amazing. I'm really surprised that worked out roughly like how it actually works on the street with nobody. So I'm kind of actually delighted that it worked out. I think that had a lot to do with Maggie being really open, and I appreciate that.
Well, she did volunteer.
She did volunteer. Sure.
We have about 10 minutes to take questions.
Yeah, sure.
So I have a question that's a little bit in two parts. The first part is, I'm wondering about a comment that you made that good art has no ethics.
That's me.
Yeah,
Why you were
so I'm
looking at
wondering,
me.
because you're traveling through space and you're asking people for a lot, you're asking them to take their picture, to know their personal information, and to publish it in a way that doesn't benefit them. Do you think there are moral implications? Do you think that there are boundaries of what's exploitative, where is the boundary between people wanting to be heard and exploiting the situation in which they're not being heard? And the second part of the question is sort of the idea that, like, when you started, your photography was fighting the idea of assimilation, but right now I think that in our generation, having your photographs becomes really different. Like, we live in this world of constant surveillance, and everyone is taking photographs, and it's not as flattering to have your photograph taken. It's much more aggressive, and a lot more of the discussion is about how the camera lens is offensive, is capturing someone's image, and how do you feel about that balance, or if there is one?
I just wrote an essay for a show, for a catalog show all about this, about Sontag, Susan Sontag's analogy of the gun, camera being a gun. And I was basically saying that, like, in an era when more pictures are made, you know, in the last year than in all the history of photography combined, I think it doesn't really make sense, the idea that the camera is a gun. I think we think about it much more as like farmers. Everyone's cultivating their own image all the time. But back to this idea I said about their good art being the absolute value, really, of trumping all ethics, which is that in the end, there's only going to be the art, no matter what, right? We're not going to be here. And our intentions, I think, are so contrary to all of this energy you're describing, the constant publishing of everything, the Facebooking, the confessional, and the immediate. Using this like 19th century camera in which everyone is, you have to be completely complicit. We're not like sneaking up on people, and we're asking them, we're engaging them in a real conversation. And my hope is that the work in that Walker Evans tradition is not particularly manipulative. It's not, all photography is manipulative. Every image is a reduction, again, in the flow and the flux of life. But my sense about it is that if we worried about giving everybody the proper voice, if we looked, say, if we said every street photograph, every photograph made in the last 175 years, street photographers in ancient Greece, you know, what would we know about that place? How much richer would our awareness be? So my feeling about it is that this project is it's so collaborative. The person has to tell us something. They have to agree, you're right. It's a crazy thing in this era when most of us are doing this all day, like looking at a screen and being completely in our own world, less and less connected to the outer world.
Which is partly why we did this. And by the way, interviewing people and taking their picture, it's shocking how unrelated it is to what's happening on the internet with these cameras and everything else. It's a totally different thing. It's almost like they're not used to expressing themselves just with their voice, just standing there in space, no virtual reality, and where it's like they're just doing it. And it's not what we get at all. And we are basically there to, in a very, I think, respectful way, because of the theme of what we're trying to explore here, which is like, we're trying to give them a voice. This is what they do. You're kind of going around, and on some level, you can't really get around the fact that you're exploring and the ideas their parents have tried to pass on to